Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA in Washington, D.C. This is our July 22nd legislative updates focusing on bridges and budgets. We are in the heart of budget season in Washington, and the early parts of the appropriations process are coming into focus. But there's a bunch of other budget reconciliation and budget projects going on as well. So that is what we will focus on this week. But before we get to that, July 22nd, significant day in world history. It was on this date in 1789 that Scotland and England signed a treaty to become one nation, forming the United Kingdom. And Wiley Post completed the first flight around the world in 7 days, 18 hours, and 49 minutes. Importantly, that was the first round-the-world trip in a fixed-wing aircraft, and actually a blimp had done it beforehand. But that took like 25 days, so it didn't count. But this was one of the big pioneering events in early flight, completed in 1930. So getting back to our legislative update. The infrastructure bill was the big news for the week. Senate Republicans defeated a motion to proceed. That is the key filibuster vote in the Senate. Democrats needed 60 votes to proceed. They ended up getting 50, although in the end, Senator Schumer shifted his vote to a no so that he could bring this back up with a motion to recommit next week. 3 issues caused Republicans to block the bill. First of all, the bill wasn't actually written yet. It was just a rough draft. And a number of senators said that they wouldn't vote for a bill until they could actually see it. There was also discussion about mass transit funding, how much of the total roughly $500 billion bill would go to mass transit. And there's an ongoing debate over how to pay for the whole thing. All of these are significant issues, but they're negotiating points, not real sticking points. There are Republicans in the Senate that just object to the bill in principle, but not all that many, and certainly not enough to sustain a filibuster. We do expect another vote on this, a perhaps properly drafted bill, next week. And the expectation is that the bill will overcome the filibuster and will end up passing, although whether it happens before August remains to be seen. This is the infrastructure that's focusing primarily on kind of classical infrastructure, bridges, roads, those sort of physical infrastructure assets. There is money in there for broadband. There is money in there for things that IEEE care about, but this is the smaller of the 2 infrastructure bills. And like I said, they do expect it to pass probably before August, but certainly afterwards, if not then. Quick update on the Endless Frontier Act, which hasn't gone very far. Expectations are that the House and Senate will start the conference process in August, kind of informally, finish it up in September. That could get moved. The House is talking about passing some additional small provisions that could be rolled into an Endless Frontier package. But here's where things really stand. Now that the House and Senate have both passed their authorization bills, and they have to reconcile them and pass a final version, but we know what's there. The reality is the budget numbers, the dollar amounts in both the House and Senate bill are just too big to be realistic. And we all know that, which is okay, because these are authorization bills, and authorization bills typically set their budget numbers very, very high to give the appropriators maximum ability to act. The way this works is appropriators can set aside as much money as they want for these programs up to the amount that was in the authorization bills. These are the bills that give agencies the right to exist and the right to function, as opposed to appropriation bills that give agencies the right to spend money. So the appropriators can give agencies the right to spend up to the authorizing numbers, but they can't go any higher than that. So authorizers typically set the numbers very high, just, in case the appropriators are feeling generous. IEEE-USA is now shifting our attention to the appropriators and the appropriation process to actually get as much money for these programs as we possibly can. Here's the thing. There are 3 key policy questions in the Endless Frontier Act that we're trying to keep in the final version of the bill. One is the creation of the new tech directorate at NSF. Second is broad education funding. There's a lot of money in Endless Frontier and the NSF Reauthorization Act, the House equivalent. There's a lot of money in both those bills to pay for workforce training. The House bill focuses primarily on graduate and postgraduate research and workforce training, whereas the Senate bill is much broader: community colleges, technical training, undergraduate work. IEEE-USA favors the broader education programs. Lastly, both the Senate and the House have significant tech transfer programs. The Senate is better than the House, but there's something in the House, which means when the two bills are conferenced, something is likely to survive the conference process and end up in the final version. However, none of that matters if the money isn't there. And so now we're working with the appropriators to make sure that the money is in these three categories. Here's the thing, though. When it comes to appropriation bills, the House can't put things in an appropriation bill other than appropriations. In other words, they can't do policy. If you're wondering, that's House Rule 23, if you want to look it up. But the Senate doesn't have those constraints. They can put anything they want in these bills, more or less. What that means is, once the Senate puts it in, the House can approve it. The House can't just start with it. That gives the Senate the advantage in some of these debates. And Senator Schumer, that's trying to get the Endless Frontier Act policy ideas moved forward, Senator Schumer is in a particularly good position to insert some of those policy items into the Senate appropriation bills, which could then be approved by the House. So we remain optimistic that we'll get not only the funding, but also hopefully the policy changes that we're looking for in Endless Frontiers. Excuse me. On the appropriation legislation itself, all of the appropriations bills have now passed out of the House Appropriations Committee. Generally speaking, the numbers we're seeing in the House are very good. They represent significant increases in the budgets that we care about, although they tend to be a little lower than the White House requests. A little surprising, but still good increases. One of the exceptions to that rule is the NASA budget, where the House actually has appropriated about $200 billion more than the White House asked for, and the White House was asking for significant increases. A couple of the other offices we care about, the DOE Office of Science is up 4.2% in the House authorization appropriation language. NIST is up 33%, which is exciting because we're big fans of NIST. A big chunk of that increase is the Industrial Tech Services. Industrial Tech Services is the part of NIST that does tech transfer. It's not all of the tech transfer programs that we want funding for. Some of those reside in the NSF budget. But it's very encouraging that the House has approved a doubling of essentially tech transfer spending, which is frankly more than I thought we were going to get. Now we have to fight to get those increases in the Senate, but we're off to a good start. The Senate hasn't done nothing formally on any of this, which is not uncommon. They have to start behind the House, and they're almost always running behind the House. While it's certainly encouraging to see how fast the House is moving on appropriations legislation, there's still a really far way to go. They have to move it on the House floor. The Senate has to do all of their work. Then they have to reconcile the two. Technically, appropriations legislation is supposed to be done by September 30th, October 1st being the first day of a new fiscal year. That's not going to happen. The expectation is at least some, if not all, of the appropriation bills will be rolled into an omnibus bill in November or December and passed as a block. That's kind of the standard way of doing things these days. The interesting thing about that is all sorts of strange things can happen in an omnibus bill. Anything can be tucked in there. Anything can be dropped. And because it's the end of the year, the fiscal year has already started, Congress wants to get home for Christmas, it's hard to pull things back out of omnibus bills once they've been put in there. The fact that Senator Schumer is our champion on a lot of the research money, particularly the Endless Frontier policy items, is very encouraging, because if the appropriators can't get their work done, it will be relatively easy for Senator Schumer to just stick something in an omnibus bill. We're working with his staff and his office, as well as the appropriators, to make sure that regardless of how these provisions move, our policy ideas and the research budget numbers are in them. And we're feeling pretty good about both of those things. Which brings us to the Budget Reconciliation Act. Now, this is the highly controversial partisan bill that's it's either a companion or an entirely different bill, depending on who you're talking to the much smaller infrastructure bill that we talked about a few minutes ago. The Senate Budget Reconciliation Act that has just become public is $3.5 trillion. In addition to some infrastructure provisions and parts of Endless Frontier Act, it includes a number of very big bills like the child tax credit expansion, Medicare expansion, a host of climate change provisions, immigration legislation, maybe, which would be a large amnesty bill, although could include some of our things, and universal pre-K, a number of other big ticket budget items. The deal with the budget reconciliation is that it doesn't have to go through filibuster. It can pass with just 51 votes, which could include the vice president. The Democrats see this as their really only shot to move a highly partisan bill through the Senate outside of normal appropriations, which is constrained in how much policy work it can do. Here's the problem. In order for the Budget Reconciliation Act to pass, the Democrats have to get every single Democrat to vote for it, which gives every single Democrat the opportunity to ask for that thing that they want for their district, which is what's driving up the cost. Doesn't give Senator Schumer much leverage to take things out or to say no to anything, because he needs exactly every single Democrat in the Senate to vote for it. The other thing here is that Senate reconciliation rules say that the only things you can put in here are provisions directly impacting the budget, that is spending or taxes. And everything the government does has some impact on the budget. It's very easy to do, a little thing that raises a little bit of money. That's not supposed to count for reconciliation. Reconciliation, according to the rules, and it's the Byrd rule if you're wondering in the Senate, named for Senator Byrd, only bills that are predominantly focused on the budget, raising money or spending money, are supposed to go into this bill. So all the other policy issues like immigration aren't supposed to qualify. Democrats are acting as though they have an agreement that this year these provisions will be allowed. That ruling comes from the Senate parliamentarian. Very interesting situation, where the Senate parliamentarian, who is an employee of the Senate and hasn't been elected by anybody and hasn't been appointed by anybody other than the Senate itself, suddenly has basically veto power over a massive bill moving through the Senate. But that's how the filibuster works. That's part of the filibuster process. Senate parliamentarians said no to including a minimum wage increase in a Reconciliation Act earlier this year. We're all waiting to see what she says about the bills this year. Now, IEEE-USA is not terribly involved in this debate. I'm raising it because this debate and the spin-off effects of the Democrats moving a highly partisan, massive spending bill like this through reconciliation is creating downstream effects on every other legislative initiative. Basically, it's becoming very difficult for the two parties to work with each other, which is a problem in a Senate that is split exactly 50-50 between the two parties. There's a couple other things going on in Washington making this even worse. One is the House Select Committee that's looking into the riots on Capitol Hill on January 6th has fallen apart. For various reasons, Nancy Pelosi rejected two of the Republicans that had been appointed to the committee. In response, the Republicans have said they're not going to participate in the committee. So the Democrats are going to run an official inquiry into the January 6th riots, while the Republicans are going to conduct their own inquiry into, I understand, the January 6th riots and other riots that happen around the country. IEEE-USA has no say in any of that. There's also a debt ceiling debate that has to happen. Technically, the US government is going to hit the debt ceiling somewhere around August 1st, although the Treasury can play with money and move money around, so there's not really a crisis until probably November. But because of the January 6th situation and because of the budget reconciliation bill, Republicans on Capitol Hill have said that they have no intention of voting for an increase in the debt ceiling, which is okay because the Democrats can pass it without their support, but it does make the issue even more partisan and harder for the Democrats to move. When you combine all of these things together and realize that we're actually pretty far along in the legislative process, we're only in July, that's halfway through the year, but because of where holidays fall, and because Congress typically takes August off, there's not actually that much legislative time left. And most of that has to be spent on the budget. So for 2021, we're already reaching a point where time is becoming the enemy of legislators who want to get something done. And all of these hyper-partisan, high-profile disputes are just making it more difficult for stuff to move. As I mentioned, Endless Frontier is set up very nicely to pass this year in one form or another, probably with all of our policies in it. The budget so far is looking very good for us, with both the White House and the House giving the budgets we care about, the research budgets in particular, pretty decent increases, historic increases in some cases. The danger now for both of those issues is Congress simply runs out of time because of the other partisan fights that they're fighting. And so that's what IEEE-USA is working on Capitol Hill, is pushing legislators to get things over the finish line, to not take up new big projects until they finish these projects, and reminding them just how important all of this is to the American people, our people in particular. A couple upcoming events I wanted to bring your attention to. The National Science Board Committee on Science and Engineering Policy is meeting tomorrow, Friday, July 23rd at 1 o'clock Eastern. There's a link up there. You can watch the meeting live if you're into that sort of thing. You can, retype that link if you want to, but it's a messy link. So you're probably better off just Googling National Science Board Committee on Science and Engineering Policy. It'll bring you right to the link. There is a White House Cybersecurity Summit that will take place on August 25th. That's just for private companies to talk with the government, or the White House specifically, about how to secure their assets from cyber attack. Pardon me. There was a hearing in the House earlier this week in which the water people up in Boston described an attempt to hack their systems that just happened a few weeks ago. So the government, the White House in particular, is starting to talk about how to respond to the increasing cyber attacks. There's a number of government workshops in the next couple of weeks on cybersecurity. And my intent is to focus our next talk, which will be in early August, on those responses and what the government is doing in response to the cyber attacks, which we'll have a much clearer idea of in August. Lastly, I just wanted to bring your attention to an event on September 1st, EVO 21. That's the IEEE-USA's Leadership Development Workshop. The next session of that will be held September 1st from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock Eastern. Attendance is free. They have a fantastic lineup of speakers. Link is up there on the screen, or you can just Google IEEE-USA EVO 21. Lastly, a bit of good and exciting news. A report out just yesterday from the Air Force noted that their work on energy weapons is bringing them interestingly close to actually being able to produce force fields. I have no idea how valid this is. The Air Force is getting close. Is not nearly the same thing as saying they have them. But it's very exciting. According to the Air Force, we are just on the horizon of having actual force fields, which is kind of cool. There's a link there to the article if you're interested in reading it. This highlights something that I think ought to be noted, which I pointed out before, but want to highlight. DC is, as is usual, fairly dysfunctional, partisan and slow. But some really remarkable things are happening in the tech space, in the government, related to the government, and in the private sector. And we saw with Mr. Bezos's publicity stunt, which was a publicity stunt, but it was still a pretty cool one, that commercial space is moving incredibly quickly and incredibly effectively. We are right on the brink of a revolution in how we access space and what we can do in outer space, predominantly because of the private sector and the partnership the private sector has had with NASA. NASA has been a very useful partner across the last 3 or 4 administrations in promoting private space flight. And we're very, very close to seeing it paid off, which is quite exciting. So, when we talk about what's going on in Washington, it's easy to get discouraged, but there's some really exciting stuff going on, which probably in the long run is far more significant than debates over filibusters and budget reconciliation and whatnot. My next update will be Thursday, August 5th. And like I said, we'll be focusing on some of the work that the government is doing, helping the rest of society deal with cyber attacks and, whatever else happens between here and there. Congress is going to be very busy this month, so we should have quite a bit to talk about. I'm going to switch to another view in just a second. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat on your screen and I'll be able to answer them. But before I do that, I am Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA. My phone number is 202-530-8326. My email address is r.t.harrison@ieee.org. Feel free to reach out anytime that IEEE-USA can be of service to you. And with that, let me stop sharing. There we go. Oh, we got quite a bit this week. Oh, Kevin, yes. It seems dubious that Biden's recent executive order urging the FTC to ban or limit non-compete agreements, blah, blah, blah. You're probably correct. First of all, so the president put out a fairly big executive order a week or so ago, looking at competitiveness issues in American society. It got a lot of press, it got a lot of attention, which is, of course, the point of it. We should take a couple steps back. First of all, the president can't usually change law or regulations with an executive order. He just can't. He's not a dictator, he's not a king. And in fact, President Biden's executive order on competitiveness did not actually change very much at all. What it did was instruct federal agencies to look at existing regulations and to see if they can be changed to promote competitiveness between businesses. And one of the things that the president has instructed the FTC to do is to look at non-compete agreements and see if we need new rules to restrict them. Now, that's a really far way of saying the president has restricted the use of non-compete agreements. But it's the necessary first step, and it's all the president can do on his own. IEEE-USA will be reaching out to the government to see if we can use this system to scale back the use of non-compete agreements in the tech space. Kevin Johnson, by the way, spearheaded an effort up in Massachusetts to not get rid of, but to deeply constrain non-compete agreements in that state. Those agreements have been banned in a number of other states as well. And so we may have an opportunity here to do something nationally that Kevin and other IEEE members have been able to do locally. Oh, got a lot of statements from Kevin here. Brendan, that's very discouraging. My friend Brendan Godfrey, don't hold my breath waiting for force fields. Come on, we can dream, can't we? And my boss, Stephen Welby, who knows this stuff far better, and Brendan and Steve both know this issue better than I did, but I was amused by the headline nonetheless. So Kevin, how can IEEE-USA IEEE members and staff best help raise the priority of the act, focusing on, you cited it, the Workforce Mobility Act. So the issue with that act and other national efforts to do something about non-compete agreements has always been a reluctance on the part of a number of legislators to weigh in on this issue, because employment law has always been a state issue. And Congress was hesitant to get involved. That may be changing. I need to reach out to Ms. Murray, Senator Murray's staff to see what's going on with that. It is not yet clear to me if that act is a viable piece of legislation or if it's a talking point. In order to be viable, it either needs bipartisan support or it needs to, Senator Murray needs to be willing to add it to something, which she can do. There's a number of vehicles that she can add it to. But if she's not willing to do that, it's probably not a viable piece of legislation, but it is an opportunity for us to talk about the issue, which is promising by itself. And thank you, Chuck, for backing me up on force fields. I appreciate that. And given the number of comments we have on non-compete agreements, I will make a point of focusing on that in our next update. I know there's been some stuff going on in the states, as well as has been now pointed out at the federal level as well. And I know that's a big deal to a lot of IEEE members. IEEE-USA has been involved in some fights over non-compete agreements in the states over the years, and we've had some discussions on Capitol Hill on the issue. So I'll make a point of delving into that issue in more detail next time. And with that, I think that's all our comments. So I want to thank everybody for joining us this week. I look forward to talking with you again on August 5th. Hope everyone's July is safe and healthy. And thank you for joining us. Have a good afternoon.
My superpower is engineering. I've been a roboticist almost all my life now. I think engineering is just as creative as the arts. Engineers, we solve problems. It impacts the world. It makes a difference. Without IEEE, I don't think I would have the network that I have. Anyone can get involved with IEEE-USA at any time. There's an immense amount of value for anyone at any career stage.